Hey everyone, welcome to another ServiceNow coding session. Today I'm going to be showing a snippet that I've created and used quite a lot in the past, and that's passing additional variables to custom UI actions. So sometimes when we're working with ServiceNow forms, we need to get a piece of information from the client to the server. The quickest way to do that is just to add a field to the table and show that on the form. Use that to transfer the information back and forth. That works, but it's not ideal. We don't want to store this information long term. We just need to use it temporarily, and so that seems like overkill. So the snippet that I'm going to walk through today will actually show you how to create a variable temporarily, pass that to the server, and show you how to use that on the server as well. So first things first, we need to create a UI action that we're going to use. I've got one here set up already on the incident table. And this one is just called pass variable. This will have an action name. We're going to need that when we submit the form. And I'm setting this up as a form link, just a related link on the form. And I'm setting it up as a client, although it will actually do client and server from within the same UI action. So I'm going to set this up and save it. I'm not going to put the code in. I'm going to pop over to my code editor and show you that. So this is Visual Studio Code. It's set up with the ServiceNow Sync plugin that I've created. If you do use Visual Studio Code, you can come right over to this plugin. So you can search for ServiceNow Sync, and you can use this. This is what I'm using to sync the local files to my ServiceNow instance as I work. So I've already set this up to sync to the sys UI action. The field here, the file here, pass additional fields, is linked to that pass variable UI action on my server. So I'm going to use this to write my UI action here. So usually within the client side UI actions, you'll have to define a function. But because we're going to use this same UI action for both client and server, I don't want to have my functions just floating out there. So the first thing that I am going to do is actually set up an object that will contain both my client and server functions, just so that they're not able to collide or override or clobber any existing functions or variables. So I'm just going to define this here, and I'm going to call it var pass variable. And this is something that I'm just trying to create to match the the UI action. This will act as the namespace for the functions in here. So I'll go ahead and create a client function here. This will be the client side code. I will create a server function, and this is what will be called on the server side. Now I need one more piece in this script so that it will work for both client and server. When it loads on the client side, it just evaluates, and we're triggering this through a button. But when it executes on the server side code, it's just going to go through and run this, and unless we tell it, it won't actually execute any code here. So the way that we do this here is just to check the window variable, and if this is undefined, we will call our server-side function. So basically the window variable here is something that is created by the browser. If it doesn't exist when this runs, that tells the script that this is being executed on the server side. When it is on the server here, we are going to run pass variable, and we want to run our server function here. So there's one other function that I want to add in here, and this is going to be the function to actually create the temporary input on the ServiceNow form. And we're actually going to just use that standard submission process to pass our variable on when the form submits. And I'm going to call this one set variable. This will take two parameters. We'll give it a name and we'll give it a value. Within this function here, because I can't really be sure how many times I may want to call this. Before I set any variable, I'm going to check to see if it exists here. And I'm going to do that by calling the document.getElements by name function, and I will look for an element with the name of name. If it is existing, and to check that, we'll just compare the length to 0. I just want to say existing equals value. So if it does exist here, just set the value to the new value. Don't need to create another instance of this input on the form. If it doesn't exist, then we actually do need to create it. And to do that here, we just create an element on the document. And we want to create it of type input. As you can probably tell by the variable name, we want this type to be hidden. We don't actually want it to be displayed on the form, so we're going to set the type attribute to hidden. And there's two more attributes that we want to set. One is the name, and that should be set to the name variable. And then we want to set the value to the value variable. Clean that up a little bit. And last but not least, we want to add this to the ServiceNow form. There's a lot of different ways that you could probably do this here. The one that I like and think is the easiest here is just to do gform.getFormElement. This will actually return back the ServiceNow form, and which is a DOM element, and I will then just append the child to that form. And that's it. This will function. This will create the variable, the hidden variable, and will be set to go. When that form submits, it will just be a stowaway on that form, and will be passed to the server side. So when I execute my client action, I actually want to set a variable, and to do that in the client function here, I'm going to just call this dot set variable, and I'm going to call it just my parm for now, and set the value to hello world. And last but not least, on the client side, once I've set the variable, I actually want to submit the form. This could really be done at any time, but it's important that it's done programmatically because you want to set the action to that pass variable, that action name of the UI action, so that it actually tries to execute this whole function server side. If you don't pass that in, then it won't know what to use, and this code won't get executed. So that will look something like this here. We want to use gsoft submit, and that will take in a few parameters. Null, it'll take in, which I can't remember what that parameter is for. The second parameter is the form element that we want to submit, and we just want to submit the standard form. And the last one is the action name, and that will be pass variable. So there we go. There, the client-side code is all coded up here. Last thing that we want to do is just echo out the parameter that we pass to the server. To do that, I'll just do a add info message, and we'll just say myparm equals. And here we actually want to go out and retrieve the parameter. To do that, we use this RP, this render properties object. This is part of the Glide API. It's documented throughout the wiki and also in my book here. And the function that we want to use here is just get parameter value. And this will take in as its parameter the name that you want to use. So this name here should match up to what you set here, set variable name, or the name of the variable that was passed. So in here we use myparm, so we'll use the same value there. So we're going to hop over to the UI action here now within the system here. You'll see that our script has already synced up with the server, and that's good. The last thing that we need to do was set the onClick action. We couldn't set it before because the script didn't exist, but we can set it now. So we'll just call pass variable dot client. And we'll save this. Then we'll go over to the incident form. And I see this thing in action here, so I'll just come to the incidents table, pick one that hopefully doesn't have a million activities. Oops, this one does. I'll have to scroll all the way to the bottom to see the related link. Here it is, pass variable. So when I click this, I'm expecting it to create that input and then send it to the server and see that output. Here it is, myparm equals hello world. So that's good. That tells me that everything is working properly here, and now we've successfully sent that variable to the server. We can use it in that UI action. It won't be available to the business rules, but we can use it there to do whatever we need to create something on the current record. We can do glide record lookups or whatever you need to do. We've got all the information there. It's a good opportunity to do that. So that's pretty good, but I think we can expand on this. We can make this a little bit better. A lot of times you're not just going to set a variable that you know, you've actually got to ask the user for some input. And so the next iteration of this script, I think I want to prompt the user to enter some value, maybe also make it a little bit more dynamic so that the server side can find those parameters. I don't need to know necessarily the name of everything ahead of time. So let me hop back over to my code editor. The first thing I want to do, which I've already gone ahead and created, was set up a UI page. This will be the UI for the user input. You could do something like a confirm or a prompt browser window. Those are okay, but we want to make this a little bit more interactive. We want to be able to look up something in the system. So I'm going to start with a blank UI page here, and we'll create a little bit of a UI here. So first things first here, the UI and everything that we create, I'm in Kingston in this version, but pretty much everything in our ESET memory will use Bootstrap to style it. So I'm gonna sprinkle some of that Bootstrap here as we go here and create this page, and I'll try to explain it. As I go. So the first thing that we want to do is create a div to contain all of the elements that we want. Probably want an input, some buttons so that the user can interact and set the values they want, and then I'll just throw in some instructions so that the user can see what this pop-up is all about. So my outer div, I'm just going to call this class. Let's start with call md12, and that's just going to tell it to create something with 100%, something that will take up the entire width of the pop-up. Within there, I'm going to create a few rows. The first row here, div class row. Create 3 of them. The first row here, we'll just put the instructions, and that can just be a paragraph tag here. The second one is where I want to create my input, and I want to use a reference field. So I'm going to use I'm going to use my knowledge of Jelly to create a reference field here on the fly. Well, that's just glide UI reference. Class will be text. Name will be, I'm just going to call it something for now. This could be really anything. This will depend on the variable that you want. The ID, I'm going to set it to the same thing. Table is the next parameter here, and this is going to be where we want to look for this reference field. I'm just going to set this to incident 2. Simplicity here. Size, I don't think matters because Bootstrap's going to override this, but you always do this anyways. Size 50. That's it. There's my reference field here. The last thing I want to do is create some buttons so that the user can actually do something, interact with this. So I'm going to call this button. Give it a class of button warning. I'm going to create 2 buttons. On click I need to do, but I don't know what it's going to be yet, so I'm just going to leave that blank. The first one here, I want to call this one set variable because this will actually set the variable in the parent form. The second button, just copy this. I don't want it to be a warning, I want it to be primary. And this will just be accept. This will just close the dialog and submit the form for me. So the last thing I need to do is actually create the script that will have both of these actions here. Let's go ahead, I'll put it at the top here. So my first function here, I want to set my variable. So I'm just going to call this one set variable. I probably could, if I wanted, make these functions part of the original UI action, but I want to put them in here just so it's easier to see on all the screen at one time. Here I want to get my variable and the value there, so I'm just going to call this one, or set this field variable to document get element by ID. And this ID should match whatever ID you use here in this this input. So that one will just be something. And then I want to call this function here, that set variable. So this will be pass variable dot set variable. And I want this to be field.name. And the value will be field.value. The second function that I want to create here will actually accept and close the dialog here. So this is accept dialog. And in this one here, I actually want to do these pretty much the same function as I have here, this gsoft submit. So I'm just going to copy this. Here we go. Null, form element, pass variable. So now when I click this button, it should close and submit that form. So there's one problem that we have in the script as it is now. The ID of this element here is something, and when I call this function here, set variable, it's going to attempt to create another input with the same name. I'm sorry, the name here is something, and the name here is something. So when it tries to look it up, it'll end up finding that element on this form here. So to get around that here, what I'm going to do is prepend a prefix to the name. And actually I want to use this prefix in a couple of places here. So I'm going to use this. I'm going to set this as a property of this object here. I'm just going to call it PV for pass variable. And when I come into this function, I'll just set the name to this.prefix plus name. I'll just prepend that to that name. And that way we won't get any collisions there. And the other thing is I'll show you when we get to the server side, we can use that prefix to find variables that we care about. The last thing I'm going to do is wire up the opening of this dialog here. So I've got this all saved as UI page. Now I want to display this on the form here. So I can actually get rid of this temporary code. And in here, what I want to do is just do var GlideModal equals new GlideModal, and this will be this takes a few parameters here. The first one, the only one that we really care about, is the name of the UI page, and that is going to be select something. Probably want to create a better name if you're doing this on your own. The second parameter I create, but I know that it needs to be false. The last one is the width of the pop-up. I'm going to set that to 400 pixels here. I also probably want to set a title. You don't have to, but it looks goofy without a title. I'll just call that select something. And then last, I want to do GlideModal.render to actually show that. So when I click that button, should instead pop up my UI page. So now that my code is ready, I'm going to hop back over to my browser. Oh, before I do that, I see I've got one typo here. GlideModal should be capital there. Let me save that. Give that a second to sync, and let me hop over to my browser, my incident form here. Let me reload this, make sure it gets the latest. Give this form a second to load, and I'll come down here to my related link, and now when I click this, it should open my window, and here it is. Here's my select something, here's my instructions, here's my reference field, and then my variables here. So let me go ahead and try this out here. This will okay, so that all seems to be working here. Setting the variable, I'm not seeing any errors, and I'm going to accept it. Oh, and we've got one error here. So we've clicking these, they're not doing anything. So let me hop back over to my code. I believe I know what this is. Yep, I forgot to set the on-click events here. So for set variable, should be, of course, set variable and accept dialog. Should be that. I'll save it. Back over to my browser. Shouldn't need to reload the page here because this will actually pull this up dynamically here. So let me go ahead and try this again. Incident, set variable, no errors, and then accept here. Now we can see it's all wired up and submits. So I've still got the old message in there, and that was tied specifically to that one variable. So I want to update that code to be a little bit more dynamic as well. So let me go back over to my code and look at that server side function here. So right now here it's just looking at my parm. That's no good here. What I want to do instead here, just by way of example here, what I'll try to do is look at all of the parameters that were sent and try to pick out only the ones that I care about, the ones with that PV prefix here. So first things first, I can get rid of that code there. That won't be useful for me. I do want to get all of the parameter keys here, and this is part of that RP, that request, that render properties object here. There's a function on that called get parameters. And if you look, you'll see this this returns a Java, I believe it's a hash map here. So we can do key set to return the just the names of those keys, those parameters, and that has a function toArray, which will return it as an array. So that's something I can use now in JavaScript here. The other ones might be usable, just getting the parameters object, and even key set might be usable, but a lot of the functions have been deprecated as part of the application scoping. So I know if I get it back as an array, that's something I can definitely loop through. So I'll create a for loop here. I'll start with my var I here, my index, set that to 0. I only want to go up to parameter keys.length, or just under it, I should say. Just to make this a little bit easier to read here, we'll create a variable here within this parameter key, and we'll set that to parameter keys. I don't need to keep typing that out. And what I'll do here is if parameter key dot index of this dot prefix equals 0. So, basically, if the prefix is at the beginning of the parameter name, and it's going to be something I care about here. Let's go ahead and output it. And here we want to just call that render properties get parameter value, and then here we'll pass parameter key. So now we should get a list of any variables that we've sent back should be output to the screen. So I'll save that. Go back over to my incident. Let's run our pass variable. Here we go. Now we've got our new parameter, PV something. That's something with the prefix there. And there's the value that must be the sysid of the record that I created. So there we have it. That's a somewhat, hopefully not too complicated way of passing additional variables through that form onto the server side. Hopefully this is helpful, saves you from having to do any hacks or creating any additional fields that you might not need. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this. Be sure to subscribe. I'm going to be trying to put out more video content in the next few weeks here, as well as trying to get my blog updated with some of these articles as well. So appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching.